Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. It was an ordinary Thursday evening when I returned home from work. The sky had already begun to darken, and I was tired from a long day of meetings and emails. I walked up to the entrance of my apartment building, the familiar sounds of the city humming around me. As I fumbled for my keys, I noticed something strange. The door to my apartment, which I had been so sure I locked before leaving that morning, was slightly ajar. My heart skipped a beat. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the door as a chill ran down my spine. I was sure I had locked it, but now it was standing open, an invitation I had never given. My mind raced with possibilities. Had I forgotten to lock it? Or worse, had someone been inside? I cautiously pushed the door open further and stepped inside, my senses heightened, every sound amplified in the quiet apartment. Nothing seemed out of place. The living room was exactly as I had left it, with the couch cushions slightly displaced from the morning rush to get out the door. I quickly moved through the rest of the apartment, my footsteps sounding too loud in the silence. The kitchen, the bathroom, even my bedroom, everything was in order. There were no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no items missing or disturbed. Yet something felt off. It wasn't the room that had changed, but rather the unsettling feeling that something had happened without my knowledge. I checked all the locks, everything seemed secure, except for that one detail. My spare key, which I always kept in a hidden compartment under the kitchen counter, was gone. It wasn't the sort of thing I ever worried about. I had kept it in the same spot for months, and no one had ever known about it. But now, as I stood in the middle of my apartment, a feeling of dread settled in my stomach. It was as though someone had been inside, rifling through my belongings, and taken only that spare key, leaving everything else untouched. The logical part of my brain told me that I was overreacting. Maybe I had forgotten to lock the door. Maybe the spare key had simply fallen out of its hiding spot and was lost somewhere in the apartment. But the unease gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the only one who had been in this space. It didn't make sense. There were no signs of struggle or break-in, but still, it felt wrong. I had no evidence, no clear explanation for what had happened, but the absence of that spare key was enough to leave me unsettled. I sat down on the couch, trying to think through everything that had happened that day. I remembered locking the door when I left in the morning, but then again, how could I be sure? The more I thought about it, the more the thought of someone else being in my apartment seemed impossible. Who would have a reason to do something like this? Who would know about the spare key? The questions spiraled in my mind, each one leading to another, none of them offering any clarity. I could feel my nerves beginning to fray. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. I stood up from the couch, pacing around the apartment as I tried to piece together any detail I might have missed. My mind kept going back to the moment I had opened the door. Had I heard anything unusual? Had I noticed anything different when I left this morning? Nothing stood out. But then my eyes landed on the window. The blinds were slightly parted, just enough to reveal a sliver of the world outside. I couldn't remember leaving them like that, but they were always drawn tightly when I left for work. Another small detail that didn't seem to fit. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, needing someone to talk to, someone to help make sense of what was happening. My voice was shaky as I explained the situation. My door was unlocked, I said, trying to keep calm, and my spare key is missing. My friend listened carefully, offering a comforting but practical perspective. Maybe you're just overthinking it. Maybe you forgot to lock the door, or maybe the key just slipped out of its hiding spot, they suggested. but I couldn't shake the feeling. There was something more to this, something I couldn't explain. After I hung up, I found myself standing at the window, staring out at the street below. The night had fully set in, and the world outside seemed far away, distant, as if I were disconnected from it. A part of me wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, that I was just tired and stressed. But the nagging feeling that I wasn't alone in my own home wouldn't go away. I decided to take action. First, I double-checked all the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. The lock on the main door seemed to be working fine, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that someone had tampered with it. I checked the spare key spot again, hoping that maybe I had overlooked it, but it was still gone. Whoever had taken it knew exactly where to look. I couldn't deny it anymore. Someone had been in my apartment. The sense of violation was overwhelming. The idea that someone had been here in my personal space made my stomach churn. I didn't know if it was a break-in or just a prank, but it didn't matter. I had been invaded in a way that felt impossible to ignore. It wasn't about the key, it was about the fact that someone had crossed an invisible line, entering a space that was meant to be my sanctuary. I called the building manager, explaining what had happened. The manager seemed concerned, but they assured me that the building had security cameras that could help. We arranged for them to check the footage from the day to see if there was anything unusual. While I waited for them to get back to me, I spent the rest of the evening in a state of uneasy alertness. I locked all the doors, drew all the blinds, and sat in the dimly lit living room, listening for any noise that might indicate someone was nearby. The next day, the building manager called with an update. "We've reviewed the footage," they said. "There's nothing unusual. No one entered the building who shouldn't have." I couldn't believe it. How could that be? I was sure someone had been in my apartment. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice shaking with frustration. "You didn't see anyone go in or out?" The manager assured me that there were no suspicious people on the video and that the footage showed no sign of a break-in. They even offered to change the locks for me, just in case. But that didn't explain how my spare key had disappeared. Nothing made sense. I spent the following days trying to go about my routine, but the unease lingered. I kept double-checking the locks, moving the spare key to a new hiding spot, and avoiding the window blinds. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. But despite my heightened vigilance, nothing else out of the ordinary happened. My apartment felt strangely quiet, as if the air had thickened with the memory of that unsettling moment. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. I had the locks changed, I kept the blinds drawn tightly, and I tried to move forward. But a part of me could never shake the feeling that someone had been in my apartment that night, that I had been watched, and that my privacy had been violated in a way I couldn't fully understand. I never found the answers to the questions that haunted me. But one thing was certain: I would never feel completely at ease in my own home again. The feeling of vulnerability lingered, a quiet reminder that no matter how secure we think we are, there are always shadows just out of sight. Story 2. I was sitting at my desk, sorting through my pockets after a long day, when I felt something unusual. It was a small, crumpled note tucked away in the lining of my jacket. My first instinct was to toss it, thinking it was just a random scrap of paper, but something about it stopped me. I unfolded it carefully, curious, only to be greeted by a simple message: "Don't forget 3:15 a.m. I stared at the words, puzzled, my mind racing. I had no recollection of writing it, and the time mentioned felt eerie. Why had I written this? And why had I put it in my pocket? For a moment I stood frozen, the weight of the note pressing into my hand. The numbers 3:15 a.m. echoed in my mind, and I felt a strange unease settle in my chest. What was supposed to happen at that time? Why did it feel like something significant, something important was tied to those numbers? My mind was buzzing with questions I couldn't answer. I scanned the note again, searching for any hint, any clue, but there was nothing more to go on. Just those simple words and the unsettling feeling that came with them. I checked the time on my phone. It was just past 8 p.m., a few more hours until 3:15 a.m. But why would I write a note about something happening in the early morning, especially something I had no memory of? The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. I hadn't set any alarms, hadn't made any plans, and nothing in my day had indicated that something was supposed to happen at that exact time. What could it be? My mind raced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was forgetting something important, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I decided to leave the note on my desk and try to focus on other things. Maybe it was a joke, or something I had written without thinking. But the more I tried to push it out of my mind, the more it seemed to take over. I kept glancing at the note, waiting for some clarity to emerge, but nothing came. It was as if the words were haunting me, pressing in on my thoughts. I stood up and walked around the apartment, trying to distract myself, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was waiting for me, something that I didn't understand. As the evening wore on, I tried to get ready for bed, but the note still lingered in my mind. I couldn't help but feel like I was missing a piece of the puzzle. Why had I written that note? Who was I supposed to meet? Or what was I supposed to do at 3:15 a.m.? I could feel a knot forming in my stomach, a sense of dread creeping in. I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind would race back to the note, back to the time, back to the feeling that something was wrong. I woke up in the middle of the night, suddenly alert. My heart was pounding, and I wasn't sure why. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. It was just after 3 a.m. The room was dark, silent, except for the sound of my own breathing. My eyes darted to the note, still sitting on my desk, and a cold chill ran down my spine. Was it time? What was I supposed to do at 3:15 a.m.? My breath caught in my throat as I tried to piece together whatever was happening. I couldn't remember writing the note, but it was as if my body knew something my mind didn't. I swung my legs out of bed and walked over to the desk. The note was still there, the words glaring up at me. Don't forget 3:15 a.m. What did it mean? I could feel my palms sweating as I picked it up. My mind raced, but I couldn't make sense of it. I had no plan, no idea what was supposed to happen, and yet everything inside me told me to stay alert, to wait. I glanced out the window at the quiet street below. Everything seemed normal, but there was an odd tension in the air, as if something was about to happen. Then I heard it, a soft knock at the door. It was so quiet, I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. But there was again another knock, followed by a brief pause. My heart leaped in my chest, and I froze, unsure of what to do. Who could be at my door at this hour? I didn't have any plans or appointments. There was no reason anyone should be here. I slowly stood up, my legs unsteady as I moved toward the door. Every step felt heavy, every breath quickening. The air around me seemed to thicken, and the anticipation weighed heavily on my shoulders. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. As I turned it, I realized that I was holding my breath, waiting for something I couldn't explain. I opened the door slowly, just a crack, and peered into the dimly lit hallway. There was no one there. The hallway was empty, as quiet as the rest of the building. My mind raced as I looked around, but there was nothing unusual. No one was standing at the door. No one was waiting for me. Confused and a little shaken, I closed the door and locked it again, my hands still shaking. The knock had felt real, but there was nothing to explain it. My pulse was still racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I looked back at the note on the desk. It was still sitting there, waiting for me to figure out its meaning. But I couldn't. I had no idea what was going on. I sat back down on the bed, trying to collect my thoughts. My mind kept going back to the note. What was I supposed to remember about 3:15 a.m.? What had I forgotten? I couldn't figure it out, no matter how hard I tried. It felt as if I was on the edge of some important realization, but I just couldn't reach it. Minutes turned into hours, and by the time the sun began to rise, I was exhausted. I hadn't gotten any rest, hadn't figured anything out. I was left with more questions than answers, and the sense of unease still lingered in the air. The knock, the note, the strange feeling of waiting, none of it made sense. I couldn't understand what was happening, or why 3:15 a.m. had been so significant, but I couldn't deny the feeling that something had happened, something that I had missed. As the day went on, I tried to put it all out of my mind. I went about my usual routine, but the sense of uncertainty followed me everywhere. It was as though I was walking through a fog, unable to see clearly. Every time I looked at the clock, I thought about the time on the note, 3:15 a.m. I wondered what I had missed. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like something out of reach, something just beyond my understanding. I decided to let it go for the time being. I had no answers, no explanation. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But something inside me told me that I would never be able to forget the note, the knock, or the strange, unsettling feeling that had followed me. Whatever it was, it had left its mark, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it, something I would have to confront someday. And as I sat there, lost in thought, I realized that maybe I hadn't been meant to understand it all right away. Maybe the answers would come when they were ready, when I was ready. For now, all I could do was wait. Story 3. It started on a quiet Tuesday morning. I woke up to the soft hum of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. Groggily, I reached over to grab it, squinting at the screen. The display showed I had a voicemail. I didn't remember receiving any calls the night before, but it wasn't unusual. I pressed the button to listen. The voice on the other end made my heart race. It was my voice, unmistakably mine, but it didn't sound quite right. I could hear the words, "Are you there?" echoing in a loop. The message played again, then again, over and over. Each time it was the same phrase, repeated relentlessly, each "Are you there?" more haunting than the last. My mind struggled to process what I was hearing. Why was my own voice calling me? I checked my call log, expecting to find some missed call or sign of the voicemail's origin, but there was nothing. I sat up in bed, the message still playing in the background. The loop continued unbroken, as if someone was trying to get my attention. I listened for a while, trying to make sense of it. Perhaps I had recorded something on my own by accident, and it had somehow ended up in my voicemail. But that explanation didn't sit right with me. Why would my phone play back a recording of my voice in such an unnerving way? There was a sinking feeling in my stomach, a gnawing unease I couldn't shake off. I hung up the phone, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I stared at the screen, unsure of what to do next. Maybe it was just a prank, something I could laugh off and forget, but something about it didn't feel like a joke. The thought of my own voice repeatedly asking, "Are you there?" made my pulse quicken. It was like a message that had been sent from somewhere, from some part of me that I couldn't explain. After a few minutes, I decided to call my voicemail again, hoping maybe there would be something else. As the voicemail prompt played, I entered my password, the familiar tone signaling I was accessing my messages. But when the message played again, I could hear my voice, the same question, "Are you there?" ringing through my ears like an unsettling whisper in the dark. It sounded more desperate this time, more pleading. I listened carefully, trying to hear any other clues, but there was nothing else. It was just that one phrase, on repeat. I couldn't bring myself to delete the message. Every time I tried to do so, something held me back, some primal instinct telling me to leave it. I kept the voicemail in my inbox, even though every part of me wanted to forget about it. For the next couple of days, I tried to go about my routine. I went to work, did the errands, even met with some friends, but the voicemail was always there, playing in my mind. I kept thinking about it. Why had it been left? Who could have possibly made it? I tried to convince myself that I had somehow made the recording myself, but the voice didn't sound like the me I knew. It sounded strained, almost as if it were coming from someone else using my voice. I began checking my phone more frequently, almost obsessively, to make sure the voicemail didn't reappear. But the looping message never went away. No new messages came in, no explanations emerged. It was like the voicemail had been placed there by some invisible force that I couldn't understand. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Maybe I was just imagining things. After all, no one else seemed to know about the voicemail. No one else heard it. Maybe I had been dreaming it all. One evening, as I was sitting alone in my apartment, the phone rang again. I froze. I hadn't expected anyone to call, and I wasn't prepared to hear my own voice again. I hesitated before answering, my hand shaking as I lifted the receiver. "Hello," I said quietly, as if expecting an answer. The line was silent for a moment before a voice spoke. "Are you there?" The voice was my own. I dropped the phone in shock, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no mistaking it. That voice, my voice, was speaking from the other end. But it wasn't just the voice, it was the way it sounded, as though it had been recorded, played back, and distorted. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone again, but no one was there. The line was dead, the silence oppressive. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the phone in disbelief. How could this be happening? How could I hear my own voice coming from somewhere else? I ran my fingers over my face, trying to clear the fog in my mind. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just too tired, too stressed. But that didn't explain the voicemail or the strange phone call. Nothing made sense. In a haze of confusion and fear, I checked my voicemail again. The message was still there, still repeating the same question. "Are you there?" The words seemed to echo in my ears, growing louder with each repetition. I couldn't escape it. I had to make it stop. I tried everything I could think of. I restarted my phone. I deleted the message, only for it to return a few hours later. I even reset the phone to its factory settings, thinking it might be some glitch or software issue. But still, the message persisted. No matter what I did, it seemed like my voice was trapped in a loop, endlessly calling out to me. I began to wonder if this was some sort of sign, some cosmic warning that I wasn't picking up on. Maybe it meant something deeper, something I couldn't understand. Perhaps it wasn't just a coincidence. Maybe there was a reason why I was hearing my own voice repeatedly asking, "Are you there?" Was it trying to tell me something? Was it trying to make me aware of something I had ignored for too long? As the days passed, the message started to change. The question became more urgent. The voice began to crack, sounding more desperate, pleading with me to respond. "Are you there? Are you there? Please answer." The pleading in the voice sent a chill down my spine, and I found myself staring at my phone in horror. It was as though the message was begging for something I couldn't give. In the middle of the night, as I lay awake in bed, I heard a soft sound outside my window. I held my breath, straining to hear. It was faint at first, but then I recognized it. It was the same question. "Are you there?" The voice was soft, but it carried through the quiet night like a whisper in the dark. My heart raced as I sat up, wide-eyed, trying to make sense of it. It sounded like it was coming from outside my window, but when I checked, no one was there. I couldn't take it any longer. I had to get to the bottom of this. My voice was calling out to me. It wasn't just a voicemail. It was something more. I needed to find out who or what was behind it, or I would never be able to escape the feeling of being trapped in this endless cycle. The next morning, I decided to take action. I called my phone provider, hoping they could give me some kind of answer. After explaining the situation to the customer service representative, they assured me they would investigate. They asked if I had any recent changes to my account or if I had experienced any other unusual issues, but I hadn't. Everything seemed normal except for the strange voicemail that had been haunting me. A few days later, I received a call from the provider. They had reviewed my account and all incoming calls, but there was no explanation for the strange voicemail. No one could trace the origin. It was as if the message had come from nowhere. They advised me to contact law enforcement if I felt unsafe, but it didn't seem like they could do much more. It wasn't until weeks later that I started to realize the truth. My voice had never stopped asking, "Are you there?" It wasn't just a glitch, a trick of the phone. It was a message from myself, but from a version of me I couldn't quite understand. And in the end, the question was more than just words. It was a warning. A reminder that there are parts of ourselves we don't always see, things we can't always explain. And sometimes those parts call out, asking, "Are you there?" hoping we will hear them before it's too late. Story 4. The day started like any other. I woke up to the dull sound of my alarm ringing, its tone as unremarkable as the day ahead. After a quick breakfast, I grabbed my bag and headed to work, letting the familiar routine calm my mind. There was nothing extraordinary about the morning. The world outside seemed as ordinary as it had always been. That was until I returned home. I found a small package waiting for me on the doorstep, its plain brown exterior completely unmarked. No return address, no postage label. It was just there, as if someone had placed it carefully, knowing it would be waiting for me when I returned. At first I hesitated. It seemed out of place, and that unease crept into my thoughts. Who could it be from? And more importantly, why was it left without any identifying information? Curiosity won over caution, and I picked up the package, feeling its weight in my hands. It was small, light enough to be unremarkable, yet there was something odd about the way it felt, almost as if it contained something fragile or secret. I walked inside, closed the door behind me, and set the package down on the table, eyeing it for a moment before carefully cutting the tape that sealed it. My fingers shook just slightly as I peeled away the brown paper. Inside, I found a single playing card. The card was simple in design, nothing unusual about it except for the bold red X drawn on its surface. The mark was thick, almost as if it had been hastily painted, the color stark against the white background of the card. I turned the card over, hoping for some kind of clue, a message, a name, or anything that could explain its presence. But the back was completely blank. The silence in the room seemed to grow heavier as I stared at it, my mind racing with questions. I had no idea what the card meant, no idea who could have sent it, or why. I stared at the red X, feeling the weight of the uncertainty pressing in on me. The card was nothing more than an ordinary object, yet the circumstances surrounding it made it feel anything but. A sense of dread began to settle in my stomach, the type of feeling you get when you realize something is off, but you can't put your finger on what. It was the kind of unease that you can't explain, yet you know it's real. I tried to dismiss the feeling. Maybe it was just some sort of prank, I thought. People do strange things sometimes. But even as I tried to reassure myself, I couldn't shake the sense that this wasn't just some random act. The absence of a return address, the mysterious delivery, and the strange red X all felt too deliberate. I couldn't help but wonder if it was a message, something more than just a card. I set the playing card down on the table and went to the kitchen, needing to clear my mind. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands still trembling slightly, though I didn't know why. The card was just a playing card after all. It was nothing. Yet my thoughts continued to circle around it. The red X, a symbol I couldn't understand. Was it a warning? A signal? Was someone trying to tell me something? I tried to distract myself with other tasks, checking emails, scrolling through messages on my phone, but nothing could take my mind off the card. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went back to the table and picked it up again, turning it over in my hands as if hoping the answer would reveal itself. I wondered if it had something to do with the strange occurrences that had started happening in my life recently, those moments where I felt like someone was watching me, or when I found things moved slightly out of place in my home. I couldn't help but feel that the card had been placed there for a reason, and not just by accident. I wondered if there was more to it than I realized. The more I thought about it, the more the red X seemed to symbolize something important, like a clue or a signal. But what was it trying to tell me? I had no answers, only questions that deepened with every passing minute. I decided to take the card to work with me the next day, maybe seeing it in a different environment, away from the familiarity of home, would give me some perspective. The entire morning, I couldn't help but feel the card's presence tucked safely in my bag. I checked my phone often, hoping for some sort of sign, anything that could help make sense of it. But there was nothing. My day went on as usual, but my thoughts remained focused on the mystery of the card. When I got home that evening, I was surprised to find that nothing had changed. The card sat on the table where I had left it, but everything else in my house seemed completely normal. I tried to shake off the sense of unease, reminding myself that I was overthinking things. But as I went to the kitchen to make dinner, I noticed something strange. The door to my closet, which I was certain I had closed that morning, was now ajar. It wasn't wide open, just slightly enough to make me wonder how it had been left that way. I walked over, my heart racing, and pushed the door open. There was nothing inside that seemed out of place. I quickly closed the door again, but the unsettling feeling continued to linger. Was I imagining things? Was I just reacting to the strange letter and the mysterious card? I wasn't sure anymore. Everything felt off, and I didn't know why. The following day, I decided to confront the mystery head-on. I contacted a few people I trusted, asking if they had received anything unusual, but no one had. I even checked with the post office, but they couldn't tell me anything about the package, no record of it, no sender, nothing. It felt as though the entire world had decided to leave me in the dark. I couldn't explain it, and the more I tried, the more frustrated I became. That night, as I lay in bed, the red X on the playing card kept flashing in my mind. It felt like a warning, but a warning for what? I couldn't sleep, the unease growing stronger with each passing minute. I tried to push it away, but it wouldn't leave. I had to know what it meant, had to understand who had sent it and why. The next morning, I went to a local bookstore. I had a strange impulse to find something, anything, that could explain the red X. I spent hours sifting through books on symbols and codes, trying to find any connection to the mysterious mark. I found many references to X as a symbol, some related to warning signs, others to marks of rejection or exclusion, but none of them seemed to match the context I was dealing with. I left the bookstore feeling just as lost as I had when I entered. Days turned into weeks, and the unease never left me. I kept the card hidden away in a drawer where I thought I could forget about it, but I couldn't forget. It became a constant presence in the back of my mind, a puzzle I couldn't solve. And then, one day, something changed. I was going through some old paperwork when I found a letter, one I hadn't remembered receiving. The return address was unfamiliar, and as I opened it, a chill ran down my spine. Inside, I found another playing card, this time with a different symbol on it, a circle with a line through it. And beneath it, in neat handwriting, was a message: "It's time. You're next." Everything clicked into place. The cards were connected. They weren't just random symbols, they were a countdown. But a countdown to what? Story 5. It was a quiet evening when I settled into the couch, ready to unwind with my favorite show after a long day. The house was peaceful, the lights dimmed just enough to give it a cozy, comfortable feel. I grabbed the remote, ready to flick through the channels, but as I reached for it, the TV powered on by itself. The soft hum of the screen filling the room startled me, but it wasn't until the image appeared that I felt my heart skip a beat. The screen showed a live feed of my front door. At first I thought it might have been some kind of error, a glitch, but the longer I stared at it, the more unsettling it became. It wasn't the typical surveillance camera view that I might expect, though. I didn't own any cameras at the front door, so the image was completely out of place. The feed was clear, detailed, and there was no reason why it should have been there in the first place. I turned the volume up, expecting some kind of explanation, but there was none. The screen remained silent, just showing my front door. I quickly grabbed my phone and checked to see if any of my devices had been hacked, maybe through some app or service that I wasn't aware of. My mind raced with possibilities. Could someone have accessed the TV through my Wi-Fi? Could I have forgotten to update some security settings? But nothing on my phone or computer seemed out of place. The TV feed continued to show my front door, and I couldn't tear my eyes away. What was even more unsettling was the time this wasn't happening in the middle of the night. It was early evening, just after sunset. I sat frozen for a moment, my mind processing the implications. The feed on the screen remained unchanged. The front door was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was no logical reason for the video to appear, and even if it was a malfunction, why was it showing such a specific view? Why my front door? My pulse quickened as the possibility that I was being watched crept into my mind. It felt as though I was no longer in control of my own home. After a few moments of staring at the screen, I decided to turn the TV off, hoping to break whatever strange spell had overtaken the room. I reached for the remote, but the TV wouldn't respond. It remained on, the video of my front door continuing to play, unaffected by my commands. I tried the power button on the TV itself. Nothing. My frustration and fear started to mount as I struggled with the device, and the feeling of unease only grew stronger. I called the company's customer service line, hoping for some kind of answer. The woman on the other end of the line seemed calm, almost unnervingly so, when I explained what was happening. "That's strange," she said, "but it sounds like a glitch. You might need to reset the TV or maybe even do a factory reset." Her voice was steady, but her words didn't comfort me. I followed her instructions, hoping it would resolve the issue. But I unplugged the TV and waited for a few moments before plugging it back in. The screen still came to life. There it was again, my front door, on the TV, clear as day. At this point, my heart was racing. I was no longer sure what I was dealing with, but it felt much too deliberate to be a simple malfunction. I checked the time again, noticing it was nearing dusk. The darkness outside was creeping in, but my attention was still focused on the screen. My front door remained empty, but the image made me feel as though I wasn't alone. The shadows in the frame grew longer as the light outside faded, making the scene look more ominous. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I tried to shake off the rising fear and called a friend, hoping they could provide some sort of rational explanation. When they answered, I quickly described the situation. My voice wavered as I told them about the TV and the video of my front door. They laughed at first, dismissing it as a simple technical issue. But when I mentioned that the feed wouldn't turn off, their tone changed. They asked if I could hear anything from outside, footsteps, any noises. I strained my ears, but there was only silence. Go outside and check, they suggested, trying to keep the mood light. But I hesitated. Something about the idea of stepping outside while the TV continued to show the front door made me feel more vulnerable. As though I was being watched in a way that I couldn't understand. But I knew I had to do it. I grabbed a jacket and walked cautiously to the front door. I opened it slowly and stepped out into the cool air, but the porch was empty. No one was there. I stood for a moment, taking in the surroundings. It was eerily quiet, and the neighborhood felt as though it was holding its breath. I looked around the yard, checking the shadows, the trees, the street. Nothing moved. I felt ridiculous for being so nervous, but the sense of unease still clung to me. I went back inside, closing the door behind me, and stood in front of the TV, which was still showing the front door. But now there was something else in the image's shadow. It was faint, but unmistakable. I snapped back, my breath catching in my throat. The shadow wasn't there when I had checked just moments before. It was as if it had materialized out of nowhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving in the dark, just outside the door. But I had been out there and saw nothing. The shadow in the feed seemed to grow larger, shifting as though it was slowly creeping closer to the door. At that point, I knew I couldn't just sit there any longer. I grabbed my phone and called the police. The dispatcher on the other end answered quickly, but when I explained the situation, I could hear the skepticism in their voice. "Are you sure it's not a technical glitch? Maybe someone's messing with you?" they asked. I didn't know how to explain that it didn't feel like a glitch anymore. This was something else. I insisted they send someone to check it out, and after a few moments of silence, the dispatcher agreed. When the officers arrived, I let them in and showed them the TV. One of the officers, a young man with a calm demeanor, studied the screen for a moment. "This is strange," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. But after examining the TV, he suggested the same thing, the possibility of a malfunction. However, when I pointed out that I had unplugged it and it had turned back on by itself, they seemed to take it more seriously. The second officer, a woman with more experience, stepped forward and asked me to step outside with her. I did, but nothing seemed amiss. There were no signs of tampering around the front door or anywhere else. But when I went back inside, I saw something that made my stomach drop on the TV. The shadow was gone, and the feed had stopped showing the front door. Instead, the screen was black. I felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. The officers couldn't find anything wrong with the TV. and they couldn't explain why it had shown my front door in the first place. After some time they left, assuring me that I was fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened, something I couldn't explain. The TV was back to normal, but every time I glanced at it, I wondered if I was truly alone in my home. Would it happen again? Or had I simply caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't have been there at all? The uncertainty lingered, and I couldn't help but feel that I was being watched, whether by something tangible or something I couldn't yet understand. Story 6. I walked into the coffee shop early one morning, hoping to get my usual fix before heading into work. The air was crisp, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the space, mixing with the faint scent of baked pastries. It wasn't overly crowded at that hour, and I liked the peacefulness of it. I made my way to the counter, ordered a medium cappuccino, and found a seat by the window where I could watch the city slowly come to life as the sun crept higher in the sky. As I settled into my seat, taking a slow sip of my coffee, I noticed a person standing near the counter, eyeing me with a curious expression. They didn't seem familiar, and I couldn't remember ever seeing them before. They were dressed casually, a simple coat and jeans, and their hair was a bit messy, as if they had been running around all morning. I looked away, not wanting to make them feel uncomfortable, but I couldn't shake the odd feeling that they were somehow looking at me in a way that suggested recognition. Just as I took another sip, they walked over to my table, and I looked up, startled. "It was nice talking to you yesterday," the person said with a smile. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I couldn't process what they had said. I had no memory of speaking to this person, let alone talking to them yesterday. I looked at them more closely, trying to make sense of it, but there was nothing about their face that rang a bell. I didn't know who they were, and I was sure we had never crossed paths before. I set my coffee down, trying to gather my thoughts. "I'm sorry, but I don't think we've met," I replied, my voice a little more hesitant than I intended. The person's smile faltered for a second, and they seemed almost confused, as if they hadn't expected me to react this way. "Oh," they said, their brow furrowing slightly. "I could have sworn we talked yesterday. We sat at that table by the window, remember?" They gestured toward the same spot I was sitting at, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of déjà vu, though I was certain I hadn't been there with them before. The more I thought about it, the more the situation unnerved me. I had no recollection of meeting anyone the previous day, let alone sitting at that particular table. My routine was usually predictable, and I rarely deviated from it. I came in, ordered my coffee, and either worked on some emails or read for a bit before heading off to work. There was no way I had spent time with this stranger. I tried to smile politely, though I could feel my heart rate picking up, the unease creeping up my spine. "I think you're mistaken," I said, trying to offer some kind of explanation, though I wasn't sure what to say. "I don't remember talking to you yesterday. Maybe you confused me with someone else." The person seemed to study me for a moment, and I could see a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. They opened their mouth to say something, but before they could, I felt a strange impulse to leave. I stood up quickly, almost without thinking, and grabbed my things. "Sorry, I've got to go," I muttered, unable to look them in the eye any longer. I walked quickly toward the door, feeling a rush of confusion and anxiety, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around and face them again. As I stepped outside into the chilly morning air, I took a few deep breaths, trying to steady myself. What had just happened? Who was that person? The entire encounter felt surreal, like a fragment of a dream that didn't quite make sense. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was missing some important piece of information. but I had no idea what it was. As I walked to my car, I tried to push the incident to the back of my mind, telling myself it was just some kind of mix-up. Maybe they were confused. Maybe I looked like someone else. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't just brush it off. Something about that moment, the way the person had spoken to me, had felt too real. The smile, the familiarity in their voice, it wasn't something you could fake. But how could that be? How could they know me so well when I had never seen them before? I spent the rest of the day trying to concentrate at work, but my mind kept drifting back to the coffee shop. I couldn't focus on anything, my thoughts constantly returning to the strange encounter. During lunch, I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, hoping that would calm my racing thoughts. But there was nothing to explain it. No messages from anyone about a meeting, no emails about a conversation I had missed. It was like the entire situation had been erased from existence, except for that person's words echoing in my head. The next morning, I found myself back at the coffee shop, despite my lingering doubts. I didn't expect to see the stranger again, but a part of me needed some kind of closure. As I stood in line to order my coffee, I scanned the room, looking for any sign of them. But there was nothing. No familiar face, no strange recognition. I felt a tiny sense of relief, though the mystery still hung over me like a cloud. It was possible, I thought, that they had simply been mistaken, that they had confused me for someone else. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something had happened, something that didn't add up. I ordered my coffee, found my usual spot by the window, and tried to relax. But as I sipped my drink, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. My eyes flickered around the room, but no one was paying attention to me. Maybe it was all in my head, I told myself. Just my mind running wild with questions I couldn't answer. I pulled out my laptop, deciding to get some work done, hoping that would help me refocus. But the sound of the doorbell jingling as someone entered the coffee shop made me look up instinctively. And there, standing at the counter, was the stranger from yesterday. They glanced over at me, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. I quickly looked away, feeling the weight of the situation settle in my chest. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Had they followed me here? Were they watching me again? My mind raced, trying to come up with some rational explanation for what was happening, but nothing made sense. They didn't approach me this time, just went about their business, ordering a coffee and taking a seat near the window. I tried to continue with my work, but my thoughts kept returning to them. Had I imagined everything? Was I losing my mind? I tried to focus, to push the confusion out of my head, but I couldn't. It was like a puzzle I couldn't solve, and the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. When I finished my coffee, I gathered my things and left the shop, walking back to my car without looking back. I still didn't have answers, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being pulled into something I didn't understand. I couldn't let it go. Not yet. The stranger's words lingered in my mind, and I wondered if I would ever find out what they meant. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe I had imagined it. But deep down, I knew something had happened, and it was far from over. Story 7. It was a typical Saturday morning, and I was just getting into my car to run a few errands. The weather was pleasant, with the sun gently warming the pavement as I backed out of my driveway. I hadn't planned on doing anything out of the ordinary that day, just a few quick stops and then back home. As I pulled onto the main road, I decided to use my car's GPS to guide me to the first destination. The screen blinked to life, and I pressed a button to enter the address. But as I tapped in the address, something strange caught my eye. In the list of recent locations, there was an address saved under the label home. I frowned. I hadn't saved any new addresses recently, and certainly not one with that name. My home was already programmed into the system, and I had never changed it. The address on the GPS wasn't one I recognized, and the label home felt oddly personal. I hovered over it, my finger poised above the screen, wondering if I had somehow added it without realizing. Maybe I had accidentally saved it during a late-night drive or while distracted. But that didn't seem right. I knew I hadn't been to any new locations lately. Curious and unsettled, I tapped the home address on the GPS, and the screen shifted to show the route. The address wasn't far away, just a few miles from where I was. It seemed like it was in a quiet neighborhood, but I couldn't place it. I wasn't sure whether to feel uneasy or intrigued. I debated with myself for a few moments before deciding to check it out. After all, there was nothing inherently wrong with a new address showing up, right? Maybe it was just a mistake or a glitch in the system. But as I drove toward the location, the feeling of unease settled deeper in my stomach. The GPS guided me through a series of winding streets, and I could tell I was heading toward a residential area. The houses were quiet, the lawns manicured, and everything seemed perfectly normal. Yet the further I drove, the more the feeling of familiarity tugged at me. It was as if I had been here before, but I couldn't quite place when or why. I drove past a few intersections, each one feeling eerily more familiar, and then the GPS beeped, signaling my arrival at the address. I parked in front of a modest two-story house, its windows dark and still. There was nothing particularly remarkable about it, but something about the entire situation felt wrong. I sat there for a moment, staring at the house, my heart beating faster than normal. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I hadn't been here before. I was sure of that. And yet the address had somehow become linked to the word home. I wasn't sure whether I should knock on the door, drive away, or something in between. The logical part of me wanted to ignore the sensation of discomfort and just leave, but I couldn't shake the curiosity. Who had put this address in my GPS? And why was it saved under home? After a few minutes, I decided to get out of the car and walk around the house. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I felt like I needed to understand more. The front yard was neatly kept, with a few flowers blooming in the garden. The house itself looked perfectly ordinary, even somewhat familiar, like one of the homes from my childhood neighborhood. But there was a strange emptiness about it. There were no signs of life, no movement inside the windows. It was as though the house had been abandoned, or perhaps frozen in time. I walked to the side of the house, hoping to find a side entrance or a better view of the backyard. As I moved around the corner, I noticed a small gate that led into the yard. It was open just enough for me to slip through. I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the best of me. I carefully pushed the gate open and stepped into the yard. It was eerily quiet, the only sound coming from the distant hum of traffic. The yard was well maintained, just like the front, but there was an odd stillness to it. I walked further, closer to the back of the house, but as I reached the corner, I suddenly stopped. There, against the wall of the house, was a set of old, weathered garden tools. The sight of them should have been completely normal, but something about them seemed strangely familiar. I took a step closer, my mind trying to make sense of the sensation. The tools weren't anything special, just a rake, a shovel, and a pair of gloves, but they looked almost as if they had been left there recently. I couldn't explain why, but I had the distinct impression that these were my tools, that I had once used them, or at least had been near them. A chill ran down my spine. How could that be? I didn't own these tools, not at least to my knowledge. I stood there for a moment, staring at the tools, trying to piece everything together. How was it possible that something so mundane, so simple, could unsettle me so much? As I turned to leave, I noticed something else, a small plaque mounted on the side of the house, near the back door. I hadn't seen it at first, but now it stood out, its inscription clearly visible. I walked closer to read it, my heart beginning to race again. The plaque read, "Welcome home." I froze. The words felt like a punch to the gut. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it all. Welcome home. The phrase seemed so ordinary, so welcoming, but at that moment it felt like a warning. It was too much, too strange. I didn't know how to explain it, but I knew I had to leave. The sense of unease was overpowering, and I had to get out of there. I turned quickly, heading back to the front of the house. As I made my way back to the gate, I could almost feel someone watching me. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was no one there. I hurried back to my car, fumbling for my keys as I opened the door. I slammed it shut, started the engine, and sped away, not daring to look back. The drive home was a blur. My thoughts were scattered, my mind trying to process everything I had just experienced. How had the address ended up in my GPS? Why was it saved under home? And why did everything about that house feel so familiar, even though I had never been there before? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow stumbled into something much bigger than I could understand, something that had been hidden from me for a reason. By the time I got home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. I parked in my driveway, but I didn't immediately get out of the car. Instead, I just sat there for a few minutes staring at the dashboard. I felt exhausted, mentally drained from the whirlwind of questions and strange sensations. My hands were still trembling slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to go back to the house to get answers, but another part of me, the part that had felt that sharp sense of dread, wanted to forget it ever happened. I couldn't explain what I had experienced, but I knew one thing for sure. Something about that house, that address, and that plaque had unsettled me in a way nothing else ever had. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. As I stepped out of the car, I glanced at my phone. The GPS had already reset itself, erasing the mysterious address from the list of recent locations. It was as if the entire experience had never happened. The address was gone, and I was left with nothing but the memory of it. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house, the plaque, and the address were all somehow connected to me, and I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever truly be able to escape the strange pull it had on me. Story 8. I had just gotten off the train, still feeling the echoes of the journey in my bones. The familiar hum of the station, the shuffle of hurried footsteps, and the murmur of distant conversations always made me feel a bit detached, like I was floating between worlds. It was a cold evening, and the station was relatively quiet, with only a few people milling around. I had made this commute countless times, always following the same routine. Step off the train, head to the exit, and walk to the nearby cafe for a moment of solace before heading home. But as I walked toward the station's exit, something felt off. It was the odd sensation of being watched, as if eyes were following my every move, though I didn't notice anyone in particular. I tried to dismiss the feeling, chalking it up to exhaustion or an overactive imagination. But then I heard a man's voice calling from behind me, startling me out of my thoughts. "Are you still being followed?" he asked. The words were so blunt, so direct, that I stopped dead in my tracks, confusion washing over me. I turned slowly, trying to place him in my mind, but I didn't recognize the man standing there. He was older, with graying hair and a weathered face, his expression serious, almost too serious for a stranger on the street. He didn't seem to be asking out of curiosity, but as if he already knew the answer. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, unsure how to respond. It was a question that felt entirely out of place in the setting, like it didn't belong. He stood a little too still, and for a brief moment the air around us felt thick, like something was about to happen that neither of us could control. The man's eyes were fixed on mine, as if waiting for me to say something, but I could hardly think straight. He took a slow step forward, his gaze unwavering. "You've been followed for some time, haven't you?" The way he phrased it made it sound like a fact, like he already knew the answer. A strange chill crept down my spine. There was no way he could have known anything about me, about my life, or about the unsettling feeling I'd had for weeks now. Yet somehow, his words rang with a disturbing certainty. I took a step back, my heart beginning to race. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. My mind was spinning. Who was this man, and why would he say something like that? It felt like he was stepping into a part of my life that I had been trying to ignore, the part that I had been desperately avoiding, the sensation of being watched, of someone following me, though I never saw anyone. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced around, as if scanning the area, and then his gaze fell back on me. "You're not imagining it," he said quietly. "It's real. They've been following you." The words hit me like a wave, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. Was he talking about the strange feeling that had been plaguing me? The constant awareness that there was someone behind me, someone watching my every move, though I could never see them. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I felt a tightening in my chest, a fear creeping in that I couldn't quite place. My mind raced through the past few weeks' strange coincidences, the fleeting glimpses of someone just outside my field of vision, the sense that I was never truly alone. Could it be true? Was someone really following me? The man seemed to sense my growing panic. "Listen," he said, his tone softening just slightly. "I know this is difficult to process. I'm not here to harm you, but you need to know what's happening. You've been under surveillance, and it's been going on longer than you realize." His words hung in the air, thick with meaning. It was hard to comprehend, to make sense of. I had no idea what he was talking about, but the sheer conviction in his voice made me hesitate. "Why me?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would anyone be following me? I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was wrong. But the truth was, there was a small part of me that already feared this might be real. The strange occurrences, the way my life had started to feel off kilter, had it all been a result of someone watching me from the shadows? The man didn't immediately answer. Instead, he looked at me carefully, as if weighing something in his mind. Then, in a low voice, he spoke again. "Because you've seen something you weren't supposed to see." The word struck me like a punch, and my breath caught in my throat. Seen something? I had no idea what he was talking about. What could I have seen that would make someone follow me? "I haven't seen anything," I protested, my hands suddenly feeling cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." I wanted to believe him, to trust him, but the logic inside me screamed that this was all some sort of bizarre misunderstanding. And yet the nagging sensation in the back of my mind wouldn't let me dismiss it entirely. And could there have been something I missed? Something I had unknowingly uncovered? The man took another step closer, lowering his voice. "You don't remember yet, but you will. You're not the first person this has happened to." His words were cryptic, but there was something about the way he spoke that made it impossible to ignore him. I could see now that he wasn't just a random stranger. He was someone who knew more than he was letting on. Someone who was part of something much bigger than I could understand. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to process everything. The man seemed to be waiting for me to respond, but I couldn't find the words. My thoughts were in a whirlwind, my mind trying to piece together what was happening and why. Who was following me? What had I seen, or more accurately, what had I missed? Before I could ask another question, the man gave me a quick, almost imperceptible nod. I can't tell you everything now, but you need to be careful. They're close. His eyes darted around the station one more time, and then he turned to leave. Don't trust anyone, he added over his shoulder before disappearing into the crowd. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of the encounter. My thoughts were racing, my mind trying to understand how I had been pulled into something I didn't even know existed. Who was following me? What had I seen, or what was I about to see? I couldn't shake the man's words from my mind as I made my way out of the station, my steps heavy, my thoughts clouded. It felt as though the world around me had shifted in some inexplicable way. What was I supposed to do now? How could I protect myself from something I didn't even fully understand? As I walked down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, someone I couldn't quite identify. The more I thought about it, the more the fear began to take root. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. Something was wrong. Something was happening that I couldn't explain. I had no idea where it would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. My life had just been changed forever, and the question now was whether I was prepared to face whatever was waiting for me. Story 9. I woke up that morning to a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't the kind of morning that usually greeted me, where I felt disoriented and groggy from waking up abruptly. No. This was different. There was an odd stillness in the air. The sun had just begun to peek through the blinds, and the room was lit in soft, golden hues. As I slowly opened my eyes, something caught my attention immediately. My bed was made. This wasn't right. I never made my bed. In fact, I rarely cared about it. I had always left the sheets rumpled, the blanket thrown across the bed haphazardly. It was a minor detail in my daily life, something I didn't put much thought into. But now there was my bed, neat and orderly, as if someone had taken the time to smooth out every crease and fold. I sat up quickly, my mind racing. Who could have done this? I was alone last night. There was no one else in the house. My heart began to beat faster as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It couldn't be a mistake. The bed was too perfectly arranged for it to be some kind of mix-up. I scanned the room, looking for any clues that might explain this odd occurrence. The room was exactly as it had been the night before, nothing out of place except for the bed. The same clothes were draped over the chair in the corner, and my shoes were still scattered across the floor. It wasn't like I had sleepwalked and made the bed without realizing it. I would have remembered that. I slid out of bed and walked toward the sheets, running my fingers over the smooth surface. Everything was in its place. The pillows fluffed just so, the blanket pulled taut across the mattress. There were no signs of anyone else having been in the room. I felt a chill creep up my spine, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone entered my room while I was asleep? The thought was unsettling, but it didn't seem possible. The windows were locked, and the door had been securely shut when I woke up. There were no signs of forced entry. I went downstairs to make my morning coffee, but the unease lingered. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing, a strange fluke or a figment of my imagination. But as I went about my morning routine, the image of my neatly made bed wouldn't leave my mind. Every time I passed by my bedroom, I felt a strange pull, like I was being drawn back to it. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and it bothered me more than I cared to admit. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but my thoughts kept returning to the bed. Who could have made it? Why would anyone do that? I couldn't even remember the last time I had made my bed myself. It wasn't something I cared about. It didn't make sense. I told myself that it was probably nothing, just a random coincidence, a trick of the mind. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just the bed. It was the feeling I had when I woke up. It was as if something had shifted, something subtle but undeniable. Something had changed, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The next night, I tried to keep my mind off of the bed. I deliberately left it messy before going to sleep, hoping that would ease my mind. I knew it was a silly thing to obsess over, but the whole situation had started to feel off. As I lay there in the dark, I listened to the quiet of the house, the only sound being the soft ticking of the clock. But then, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard a sound, faint but distinct. It was a rustling, as if someone were moving around in the room. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Was someone in my room? I strained my ears, but the sound stopped as quickly as it had started. I lay there in the dark, trying to steady my breath. Was I imagining things? It could have been the wind or just the house settling. But then the thought crossed my mind, what if someone was really here? What if this wasn't just a strange coincidence? I must have drifted off eventually, because the next thing I knew, the sunlight was streaming through the window again. I sat up quickly, my eyes darting around the room. The first thing I noticed was that my bed was once again made. This time it wasn't just neat, it was perfect. Every crease had been smoothed out, every pillow aligned in the exact same spot. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I sat there, unable to move. This couldn't be happening. No one else had been in the room. There was no way. I reached for my phone, trying to ground myself in some kind of reality. The notifications were just as I had left them the night before, no messages, no missed calls. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The house seemed so quiet, too quiet. It was as if the silence was watching me, waiting for me to make sense of this situation. I needed answers. That afternoon, I decided to take action. I went outside and checked the perimeter of the house, looking for any signs that someone might have been sneaking around. The gates were locked, and there were no footprints in the yard. I even checked the cameras, but they had all been turned off. That's when I realized something. The cameras should have been on. I never turned them off. I hadn't even touched them. Someone else must have done it. I felt a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck as I stood there, piecing everything together. It wasn't just the bed. It was the cameras. It was the feeling that someone was in the house with me, even when I was alone. I felt a creeping sense of dread that I couldn't shake. Was I being watched? Had someone been entering my home without my knowledge? I couldn't let it go. I spent the next few days analyzing every detail, searching for anything that might explain what was going on. But every time I looked around, the same unsettling feeling followed me. My bed was made every morning, despite my best efforts to leave it messy. The cameras stayed off, and I couldn't remember touching them. It felt like I was being trapped in some strange cycle that I couldn't break. Finally, I reached out for help. I contacted a friend, someone I trusted, and told them everything that had been happening. They listened patiently, offering comfort and reassurance. But when they came over to stay the night, nothing happened. The bed stayed messy, the cameras stayed on, and the feeling of being watched faded. For a while, everything seemed normal again. But then, one morning I woke up to find the bed made once more. The feeling returned, just as strong as before. I never found out who had been making my bed or why it happened. Some things remain a mystery, hidden in the shadows. But after everything that occurred, I started locking the doors and windows more carefully, just in case. I couldn't let my guard down. And now, every morning when I wake up, I check my bed just to make sure. It's always made, and no matter how many times it happens, I still don't know why. Story 10. The moment I saw the notification, a chill ran down my spine. Reminder, they're watching. I stared at my phone in disbelief. I hadn't set any reminders for the day, and this was something I couldn't remember ever having seen before. The notification had a strange, almost cold feeling to it, like someone was in the room with me, just waiting for me to react. My heart pounded in my chest as I swiped to check the details, but there was nothing more, just that cryptic message staring back at me. I tried to brush it off as a glitch or some weird prank. Maybe an app had sent a random reminder, or it was just some kind of automated message that made no sense. But the words echoed in my mind. They're watching. Who was they? And why did it feel like the message was meant for me? I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that this was the beginning of something I couldn't control. I set my phone down on the counter, trying to distract myself by making a cup of coffee. The smell of the freshly brewed coffee should have been comforting, but instead, it just heightened the tension I felt. I couldn't stop thinking about that notification. It felt like a warning, a sign that something was coming, something I wasn't prepared for. I kept glancing at my phone, waiting for it to buzz again, but it remained silent. The minutes stretched into an eternity as I went through the motions of my morning routine. I checked my email, but there was nothing unusual there. My calendar was clear for the day, and everything seemed normal on the surface. But that notification, those words kept playing over and over in my head. They're watching. It was as if I had been marked, singled out for some reason I couldn't understand. As I left my apartment, I noticed a strange stillness in the air, like the world itself was holding its breath. The usual sounds of traffic and birds chirping were muted, distant. My footsteps echoed on the sidewalk, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. I checked over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the street was empty. There was nothing to explain the uneasy feeling crawling under my skin. I chalked it up to nerves and tried to push it aside. When I arrived at work, things didn't feel much better. I tried to focus on my tasks, but the nagging sensation that something was wrong continued to haunt me. I glanced at my phone once again, but there were no new notifications. It seemed like I was the only one who had been affected by whatever had happened. But the sense of being watched only grew stronger, as if invisible eyes were trained on me, no matter where I went. At lunch, I decided to step outside for some fresh air. The crisp air was a welcome relief, but the unease in my chest remained. I couldn't escape it no matter how hard I tried. I walked around the block, hoping the movement would clear my head, but the feeling of being watched never left me. It was as if the whole world had changed, and I was the only one who could sense it. I returned to my desk, my thoughts racing. The idea that I was being watched became more tangible, more real. I looked around at my coworkers, wondering if they could feel it too. Was anyone else aware of this strange sensation, or was I the only one? I couldn't tell if I was losing my mind or if something much bigger was happening. It felt like I had stumbled into something dark and unknown, something I wasn't meant to see. The day passed in a blur, my mind too preoccupied with the message to focus on anything else. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, even though there was no one there. Every glance in the mirror, every reflection in a window, felt like an opportunity for someone to catch me looking. When I left the office that evening, I half expected to see someone standing outside, watching me. But the street was empty, as quiet and ordinary as it always was. When I got home, I immediately checked my phone again, hoping for some sort of explanation, but nothing had changed. The message had come from a reminder app, but there was no indication of who had created it or why it had appeared. I tried to delete it, but the app wouldn't let me. It was as if the message had become a permanent fixture on my device, a reminder that I couldn't escape. I tried restarting my phone, but the message remained, staring back at me like a silent accusation. I couldn't sleep that night. Every noise in the apartment seemed amplified. Every shadow in the corners of the room felt like a threat. I kept thinking back to the message. They're watching. It seemed like a warning, but a warning about what? Was someone tracking my every move, waiting for the right moment to act? I couldn't answer these questions, and that uncertainty gnawed at me. The next morning, the message was still there, and the feeling of being watched had only intensified. I couldn't concentrate on anything, couldn't focus on any task. I kept expecting someone to walk into my apartment, or for my phone to buzz with another cryptic reminder. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. It felt like my world was slowly crumbling, like everything was slipping out of my control. At work, I tried to talk to a colleague about the strange message, but they brushed me off, saying I was overreacting. Maybe I was, but deep down I knew something was wrong. I had no proof, no concrete evidence, but the feeling in my gut told me this wasn't just my imagination. Something was happening, and I was powerless to stop it. As the days wore on, the sensation of being watched never left me. I started to notice things that I hadn't before: strange glances from strangers, cars that seemed to be following me as I drove, people who appeared just a little too interested in my movements. The more I looked, the more I saw. It was as if the world around me was slowly being distorted, like reality itself was shifting. I began to take precautions, avoiding certain places and people, and being extra cautious about where I went and who I interacted with. But no matter how careful I was, the feeling of being watched lingered. It became impossible to tell if I was paranoid or if something truly sinister was happening. The reminder message still sitting on my phone seemed to be a constant reminder that I was not safe, that I was being watched by forces beyond my control. One evening, after another restless night, I received a message on my phone. This time it wasn't a notification, it was a text. I hesitated before opening it, but when I did, my heart skipped a beat. The message read, "We see you. You're not alone." I felt a surge of panic flood my chest. Who was sending these messages? How did they know? Was this some kind of elaborate prank, or was I truly being watched by someone or something that I couldn't understand? I thought about calling 911, but what would I even say? How could I explain this? There were no concrete threats, no evidence of anything being physically wrong. But the sense of unease, the feeling that I was being watched, was undeniable. I didn't know what to do or who to turn to. And then, as quickly as it had started, the messages stopped. The reminder vanished from my phone, and I no longer felt the eyes of someone or something on me. But even now, as I sit here writing this, the lingering feeling remains. I still check over my shoulder, still wonder if I'm being watched. I don't know who or what was behind all of this, but I can't shake the feeling that it isn't over. Something is still out there, and I don't know if I'll ever truly be free. Story 11. It started with a notification on my phone. I was sitting on the couch after work, scrolling through emails when the calendar alert popped up. Final meeting, it said, scheduled for 12 o'clock midnight. My first reaction was confusion. I never scheduled meetings that late. In fact, I could not remember the last time I even used my work calendar outside of work hours. My stomach tightened as I opened the app to look closer. The appointment had no details except for the title and the time. There was no location, no notes, and no attached participants. Just the words "final meeting." I tried to delete it, but the option was grayed out. I tapped at the screen repeatedly, growing more frustrated as nothing happened. After a few minutes, I decided to close the app and reopen it. When I checked the calendar again, the meeting was still there. I sat back on the couch, my mind racing. Maybe it was some kind of glitch. It would not be the first time my work calendar had acted up. But the title bothered me. Final meeting. It was such an ominous phrase. It sounded more like a threat than an appointment. I considered calling the IT department, but it was late, and I figured I would just check with them in the morning. As the evening wore on, I tried to distract myself with television and dinner, but my mind kept returning to the calendar event. My phone buzzed around 10 o'clock with another reminder. Final meeting scheduled for 12 o'clock midnight. My pulse quickened as I stared at the screen. Who would schedule something like this? I checked my email to see if there were any notifications from my boss or coworkers, but there was nothing. By 11 o'clock, I was starting to feel genuinely nervous. I reopened the calendar and stared at the appointment. I tried editing it again, but the app still would not let me make any changes. I even tried logging out and back into my account, but the meeting remained. The idea that someone else might have accessed my calendar crept into my mind. But who would have done that, and why? I decided to stay awake until midnight, just to see what would happen. Maybe it was some strange prank or an automated error. I sat on the couch, the television on low in the background, as the minutes crept closer to 12 o'clock. My heart pounded as the time approached. When the clock hit 12 o'clock, my phone buzzed with the final reminder. A few seconds later, my screen went black. I held my breath as the phone restarted itself. When it powered back on, there was a new notification. Meeting completed. My hands were shaking as I opened the calendar. The appointment was gone. No record of it remained. My entire body felt tense as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I set my phone down and stood up, pacing around the apartment. My thoughts spiraled. Someone had to have access to my account. But how? My passwords were complex, and I never shared them with anyone. I checked my email for any security alerts, but there was nothing. My phone buzzed again, and I nearly jumped. It was a new email. The subject line read, "Final meeting." My hands trembled as I opened it. The body of the email contained just one sentence: "Thank you for attending." No sender information, no contact details, just that single line of text. My mind raced through possible explanations. A prank? A hacker? Or something worse? The next morning, I called the IT department as soon as I got to work. I explained the situation, trying to keep my voice steady. The technician on the other end of the line sounded skeptical. "You said the meeting disappeared after midnight," they asked. "And you got an email?" I confirmed both. "That's unusual," they said. "We can run a security check on your account." I sat at my desk, feeling restless as I waited for them to get back to me. My email inbox was quiet, and my calendar looked normal. By noon, the technician called back. "We didn't find anything unusual," they said. "No evidence of a breach, and there's no record of that email in our server logs." My heart sank. "But I saw it," I said. "It was there." The technician paused. "It's possible you received a phishing email, but if that's the case, it should have left some trace." I spent the rest of the afternoon feeling paranoid. Every time I got a notification or an email, my heart jumped. I found myself checking my calendar repeatedly, half expecting the meeting to reappear. Nothing happened. I stayed late at work that evening, trying to focus on finishing a project. but my thoughts kept drifting back to the mysterious message. That night, I locked my doors and double-checked the windows before going to bed. I placed my phone on the nightstand and lay down, trying to calm my thoughts. At around 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating. Groggy and confused, I reached for it. There was a new notification from my calendar. New meeting scheduled for 3 o'clock a.m. I sat up, my pulse racing. I opened the app, and there it was, another appointment. This one was titled Follow Up. My chest tightened. My hand shook as I tried to delete it, but once again the option was grayed out. I stared at the screen, feeling frozen. 3 o'clock was less than an hour away. This time I did not wait. I called IT immediately. A sleepy-sounding technician answered after a few rings. "My calendar, there's another meeting," I said quickly. "You need to check my account." The technician sighed. "All right, hold on." I could hear them typing. After a long pause, they said, "There's nothing showing up on our end." My heart hammered. "But I can see it right now," I insisted. "It's scheduled for 3 o'clock. "Wait," the technician said, sounding more alert. "We just detected a login attempt from an unknown device." My breath caught. "Where?" I asked. Another pause. "It's coming from your apartment." My blood ran cold. I stood up, my eyes darting toward the darkened corners of my room. My heart was pounding so loudly it hurt. "We're sending security to your location," the technician said. "Stay on the line." I grabbed my phone and moved toward the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. A soft sound came from the hallway, a creaking floorboard. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back, pressing my back against the wall. The sound came again, closer this time. The technician's voice was distant through the phone. "Security will be there in 5 minutes. Stay calm," but I could barely breathe. The handle of my bedroom door turned slowly. I let out a shaky breath and backed toward the window. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The door opened an inch, then stopped. For a moment there was only silence. Then the door closed again with a soft click. A few minutes later, security arrived. They searched the apartment but found no one. All the locks were intact, and there was no sign of forced entry. The technician followed up the next morning, confirming that there had been a breach attempt, but they could not trace the source. I changed all my passwords and added additional security measures, but I knew deep down that it would not make a difference. The calendar events never returned, but the feeling that someone had been in my home never left. I no longer trusted the silence of my apartment at night, and whenever I opened my work calendar, I braced myself for the possibility of another meeting. Story 12. I was sitting on the couch when my phone buzzed with a message. I glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number. The message read, "Did you enjoy the movie last night?" My brow furrowed as I reread the words. I had not gone to a movie last night. In fact, I had stayed home alone the entire evening, watching TV and scrolling through my phone. Curiosity and confusion settled over me as I stared at the message. I thought about ignoring it, but my fingers hovered over the keyboard. I finally replied, "I think you have the wrong number." A minute passed, then another, but no response came. My mind began to turn over the possibilities. Maybe it was just a simple mistake, or maybe someone was trying to play a joke on me. After a few minutes, I shook it off and went back to watching TV. Still, I could not help but glance at my phone every few minutes, waiting for another message. Eventually, I convinced myself that it was nothing and turned my attention back to the screen. I told myself that it was not worth overthinking, but the feeling of unease lingered in the back of my mind. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. I picked it up, and it was the same number. This time, the message said, "You were sitting in the back row, right?" My heart skipped a beat as I read the words. I had not gone to any movie. How could someone think they saw me there? My fingers tightened around the phone as I reread the message. A chill ran down my spine as I typed a response. "I think you have the wrong person. I didn't go to a movie last night." I hesitated before hitting send, wondering if this was some kind of prank. A response came almost immediately. "Are you sure?" My chest tightened. The certainty in the message made my skin crawl. Who was this person, and why were they so convinced it was me? I tried to shake it off, but the unease only grew stronger. I decided to block the number, thinking that would put an end to it. I told myself it was just a mistake or someone trying to mess with me. But as I put my phone down, I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. How could someone have mistaken me for someone else so confidently? I managed to sleep that night, but my dreams were restless and strange. I woke up several times, convinced I had heard my phone buzz or that someone was standing outside my window. Each time I checked my phone, but there were no new messages. When I finally woke up for good, I felt drained. I convinced myself it was just a weird prank, and I needed to move on. The next day passed without incident, and by evening I had almost convinced myself it was nothing. But just as I was starting to relax, my phone buzzed again. It was the same number. This time the message read, "You were wearing a blue jacket, right?" My stomach twisted into knots. I had worn a blue jacket yesterday, but only while running errands. I had not gone to a movie or been anywhere unusual. My hands trembled as I typed back, "Who is this?" I stared at the screen, waiting for a response. Minutes passed, and then a single message popped up. "You know who I am." My breath caught in my throat. I had no idea who this person was. My heart hammered in my chest as I stared at the message, unsure of how to respond. I blocked the number again, telling myself it was the only logical thing to do. It had to be a prank. Someone was playing a game with me. But the feeling of unease only deepened. I checked the locks on my doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. Still, I could not shake the feeling that someone was watching me. That night, I struggled to sleep. Every sound seemed amplified. Every shadow in the room felt like it was moving. I woke up at one point, convinced I had heard footsteps outside my bedroom door. I sat up, listening carefully, but the house was silent. Still, the sense of being watched lingered. The next morning, I told myself I was overreacting. I got through most of the day without thinking about the messages. But just before sunset, my phone buzzed again. It was a new number this time. The message read, "I saw you again today." My pulse quickened. My eyes darted toward the windows as I tried to think clearly. I had gone to the grocery store earlier, but I had not noticed anyone following me. I replied, "Who is this? Why are you messaging me?" The response came quickly, "You know me." My stomach tightened. I tried to think of anyone. It could be a friend, a coworker, but no one came to mind. My hands shook as I typed, "I don't know you. Leave me alone." No response came after that. That night I could not sleep. I sat up in bed, the phone resting on the nightstand beside me. I kept checking the locks, the windows, the doors. My heart raced at every noise. At one point I thought I heard soft footsteps outside my door. I held my breath, straining to listen. After a moment everything was quiet again. I lay awake for hours, waiting for another message, but none came. The next morning, I tried to put it behind me. I reminded myself that it was probably just some strange mistake. But later that afternoon, I stepped outside to take out the trash and noticed something that made my blood run cold. Sitting on the doorstep was a folded piece of paper. I hesitated before picking it up. My hands shook as I opened it. The message was written in the same tone as the texts. I enjoyed the movie too. My breath hitched as I dropped the paper. My eyes scanned the street, looking for anyone suspicious, but the street was empty. I locked the door behind me and sat on the couch, heart racing. Whoever this was, they were not just texting me, they knew where I lived. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That someone had sent me strange messages and left a note at my door. I knew it would not lead anywhere. I checked my phone for any new messages, but nothing had come through. I sat in the quiet house, every sound making me flinch. Over the next few days, the messages stopped. Slowly, I began to relax. I convinced myself that it was over, that whoever had been playing this game had moved on. But one night, as I was about to fall asleep, my phone buzzed again. My heart pounded as I reached for it. The message read, "I'll see you soon." I sat up, the cold chill returning to my chest. I did not reply. I could not. I turned off the phone and sat in the dark, listening to the silence of the house. I told myself that it had to be a prank, that it would stop eventually. But deep down I knew better. Someone had been watching me, and they were not finished yet. In the following days, I made sure to lock my doors and close my blinds. I stopped wearing the blue jacket. I avoided any patterns in my routine. The messages stopped coming, but the feeling of being watched never faded. Whoever it was, they were out there, and they had made it clear they knew me better than I realized. Story 13. Allah. It started late one evening when I was sitting on the couch watching television. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the television in the background. I was halfway through a show when the doorbell rang. My heart jumped a little, mostly from the unexpectedness of it. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was already getting late. I reached for my phone and opened the security camera app. The camera pointed directly at the porch, and I could see the dim glow of the porch light illuminating the empty space. No one was there. My brow furrowed as I leaned closer to the screen, wondering if maybe the camera had glitched. But the live feed was working perfectly. The porch was completely empty. I stood up and walked toward the door, hesitating for a moment before peeking through the peephole. And just like the camera showed, there was nothing outside. No movement, no shadows, not even the sound of footsteps leaving. I opened the door slightly, feeling the cool night air drift in. I stepped out and looked around, scanning the yard and the street beyond. Everything was still. After a moment, I went back inside, locking the door behind me. I told myself it was probably just a malfunction. Maybe the doorbell's wiring had been acting up. I sat back down on the couch, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. A part of me wondered if maybe someone had rung it and quickly run off, but why would someone do that so late at night? About an hour later, just as I was starting to drift off on the couch, the doorbell rang again. This time I sat up immediately, my heart racing. I grabbed my phone and checked the security feed. Once again, the porch was empty. No person, no movement, nothing at all. A cold wave of unease crept over me as I stared at the screen, waiting for something to change. I walked toward the door, slower this time, listening for any signs of movement outside. I pressed my ear against the door, but all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. I opened the door slightly and peeked outside. The porch was empty. The street was dark, the neighboring houses quiet. I closed the door, bolting the lock this time. I sat back down, trying to push down the rising tension in my chest. Maybe it was a prank, someone messing with me for fun. But the longer I thought about it, the less that made sense. My porch light was on, and the camera had a clear view of the whole area. No one could have rung the doorbell and gotten away that quickly without being seen. That night, I barely slept. Every small noise in the house made me flinch. I kept my phone on the nightstand, the security feed open just in case. At around 3 in the morning, the doorbell rang a third time. I sat up so quickly I nearly fell out of bed. My hand shook as I reached for my phone. I opened the app, but the screen showed the same empty porch. I forced myself to walk to the front door. I hesitated with my hand on the lock. My pulse thudded painfully in my chest. Slowly I unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. The night air was still and cold. I stepped outside and looked around, scanning the yard and the street. Nothing. No footprints on the porch, no sign of anyone having been there at all. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat on the floor with my back against it. My mind was racing, searching for answers. Maybe the doorbell was malfunctioning. But if it was broken, why would it ring so irregularly? And why did the security camera show nothing? The next day, I called the company that installed the camera and the doorbell. They said everything was working fine. The technician on the phone checked the system remotely and assured me that the camera was fully functional. I even tested the doorbell myself during the day, pressing it over and over to see if I could recreate the problem. It worked perfectly every time. For the rest of the day, I tried to put it out of my mind. I ran errands and kept busy, hoping that maybe I had just imagined the whole thing. But that night, just as I was starting to relax, the doorbell rang again. My stomach clenched as I picked up my phone and opened the app. The porch was empty. I stood by the door, listening. There was no sound outside. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The air felt heavier this time, colder. I walked down the steps and looked around the yard. My street was dark and still. The silence was oppressive. Just as I turned to go back inside, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, just at the edge of my yard, slipped out of sight behind a tree. My breath quickened. I stood frozen for a moment before stepping back inside and locking the door. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the security footage. I rewound the video to just before I had seen the movement, but the camera showed nothing. It was as though the shadow had never been there. I started to dread nightfall. The next evening, the doorbell rang again. I didn't even need to check the camera to know what I would see. I watched the feed anyway, and as expected, the porch was empty. This time I didn't open the door. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, and listened. After a few minutes, I heard a soft scraping noise at the door. My breath caught in my throat. The noise stopped after a few seconds, followed by silence. Over the next week, the ringing became more frequent. Sometimes it happened in the middle of the night, sometimes during the day. The security footage always showed the same empty porch. I stopped answering the door altogether. I even taped over the doorbell, but it didn't stop the ringing. One night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, the doorbell rang again. I stared at the ceiling, refusing to get up this time. But then I heard the sound of the front door creaking. I sat up sharply, heart racing. I grabbed my phone and checked the security feed. The porch was empty, but the door was slightly ajar. Slowly, I got up and walked toward the door, holding my breath. I reached for the doorknob and pulled it closed, locking it carefully. As I stood there, I heard something. A soft knock. My breath caught in my throat as I backed away from the door. The knock repeated, soft and deliberate. I ran to the window and pulled back the curtain, but the street was empty. The knocking stopped. I stood there for what felt like forever, listening to the silence. Then, I heard a voice, just outside the door. "Let me in," it whispered. It was barely audible, but I knew I had heard it. My heart pounded as I backed away from the door, holding my breath. After what felt like hours, the night settled into silence. The ringing stopped. The knocking stopped. I stood there in the dark, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The next morning, I checked the footage from the night before. The camera had recorded the door opening by itself. There was no figure, no sign of anyone standing there, just the door slowly creaking open before it closed again. That day, I had the doorbell removed. The technician seemed confused when I told him why, but I didn't care. After the doorbell was gone, the ringing finally stopped. The house felt quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had stood there, just outside the door, waiting for me to open it. And even though the ringing was gone, I knew deep down I had almost let it in. Story 14. The day started like any other. I woke up to the soft hum of the morning sun filtering through my blinds, casting faint patterns across the walls. After a quick shower and a light breakfast, I checked my phone for messages and glanced over my schedule for the day. It was an ordinary morning, quiet and uneventful. I had no reason to think that anything strange would happen. When I stepped outside to check my mail, I noticed a small envelope sitting at the bottom of the mailbox. It was plain and white, with no return address or markings of any kind. My name was written on the front in neat handwriting, the letters small and precise. I pulled it out and walked back inside, setting it down on the kitchen table as I sorted through the rest of the mail. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a child's drawing. The drawing was made with crayons, the lines uneven and colorful in that typical childlike way. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it. The drawing showed a person lying in a bed, eyes closed, with dark hair spilling over the pillow. It was unmistakably me. The details were strikingly accurate. The shape of the bed, the color of the blanket, even the small lamp on the nightstand next to the bed, it all matched perfectly. But that was impossible. No one had been in my bedroom recently, and certainly not a child. My hands felt cold as I turned the drawing over, searching for some kind of explanation. There was nothing on the back, no name, no message, just the picture itself. I sat down at the table, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. How had someone managed to capture such detail about my bedroom? And why would a child draw it? The more I stared at it, the more unsettled I felt. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was some kind of prank, or maybe someone I knew had let their child visit my apartment without telling me. But none of it made sense. I folded the drawing and tucked it into a drawer, trying to put it out of my mind. But the image lingered in my thoughts all day, like a shadow I couldn't shake. That night, I lay awake in bed, listening to the faint sounds of the city outside my window. Every creak of the floor, every soft hum of the building settling made me more aware of my surroundings. I couldn't stop thinking about the drawing. The next morning, I checked the mailbox again, half expecting to find another envelope. There was nothing. I told myself I was overreacting, that it had to be some strange coincidence. Maybe someone had just been guessing, or maybe the resemblance was a trick of my imagination. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. A few days passed without incident, and I began to relax. I went about my usual routines, telling myself that it had been a fluke, a strange, unexplained event that didn't mean anything. But then, a week later, another envelope appeared in my mailbox. My stomach tightened as I pulled it out, already knowing what I would find inside. Sure enough, it was another drawing. This one showed the same figure lying in bed, but now the figure's eyes were open. The details were even sharper this time, the color of the sheets, the slight crack in the wall near the window. My heart raced as I studied the picture, trying to make sense of it. The figure's face was drawn with more precision, and the eyes stared directly forward, wide and dark. Someone had been in my room. That was the only explanation. But how? My apartment had been locked, and nothing had been disturbed. I would have known if someone had been inside. Unless they had been there without me knowing. The thought made my skin crawl. I checked the locks on my doors and windows 3 times that night before going to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The next day, I called a locksmith and had the locks